Aging touches each one of us, our parents, our children, and of course, ourselves. How can older adults stay healthier longer? What are the essential dimensions of caregiving? Do seniors have changing medical, social, and psychological needs? If so, how can one be an effective advocate for a loved one in order to meet essential caregiving requirements? How can we enhance communication with our aging parents? What do you need to know about chronic care disease management and long-term care? Can one prevent caregiver exhaustion? What role does home modification play in the lives of older adults? Hello, my name is Attorney Ramsey Bahrawy, and welcome to Your Money, Your Life. Joining me to discuss aging-related issues is Linda Smith of Metrowest Elder Care Management. By way of background, Ms. Smith is a registered nurse and geriatric care manager. Linda is familiar with many acute and chronic conditions such as cardiovascular disease, diabetes, heart failure, lung disease, and memory loss. She has worked at premier hospitals in the Boston area, including Mass General. Today, she's a principal in Metrowest Elder Care Management, whose objective it is to help in identifying necessary services by finding quality community resources, as well as overseeing and monitoring those services in the role of an advocate. It does all of this in order to assist older adults to live a fulfilling life. Linda, welcome to Your Money, Your Life. It's great to have you on the program. Linda, now, people who are older, their children oftentimes have the same concerns. They have a concern of whether the older adult can live safely at home. They have a concern as to whether the older adult can still manage his or her finances. Can they pay their bills? Can they manage a checkbook and balance that checkbook? Can they continue to drive? And can they do that safely? And so oftentimes the kids will step in and they say, look, we'll help you out. They become caregivers. But caregiving can be very, very stressful. So what can caregivers do to make things easier?
There's a lot of things caregivers can do to make things easier. They need to, first of all, know what their own limitations and capabilities are. If they really have a little bit of energy, a little extra time, then they can put that to good use by learning how to best help mom or dad. Once they develop the time and the interest, then they can use their resources, ask for help from many different areas. That's the tricky part, is knowing where do you go to find the answers,
right?
Because you can go to 100 different places and hear 100 different answers. So ideally what you want is to feel like you're getting support by one or two organizations that really understand all of your needs, so you're not going crazy going everywhere.
Okay,
Yeah.
It's pretty much common knowledge that most people who become caregivers really know very little about senior issues. So where can they go to learn these issues, and where can they find the community resources?
Well, the web is very common for the baby boomer, the children, to be browsing. They can learn a lot by going on to aging, putting in certain keywords. Mm-hmm. Elderly parents, aging. I like the children to understand the parents' diagnoses, medical diagnoses, mm-hmm. and psychiatric diagnoses. So once they get those diagnoses, such as heart failure, for example, or mild cognitive impairment, or multiple sclerosis, or lung disease, whatever, emphysema, then they can Google those words and they mm-hmm. can learn what that disease is. Mm-hmm. And then they can, when they visit mom and dad, they'll know what the symptoms of that disease process is.
Okay.
So going to their senior center might help a little bit with learning some of the supports, such as state funded programs like Meals on Wheels and The Ride, mm-hmm. so mm-hmm. that they can have options for transportation. Mm-hmm. Some social activities at the senior centers. If the senior is interested in participating, I find a lot of seniors aren't utilizing their senior centers enough.
Okay. Well, that becomes an issue because, as you said, that's an area for them to socialize at the senior center. Do you ever run into situations where someone arranges for, let's say, Meals on Wheels, and the senior older adult won't accept the meal.
Absolutely, all the time.
What does one do in that situation?
Well, the senior will often reject anything or everything or bits and pieces. What I like to do is teach the caregivers how to empower the senior so that the senior is coming up with the idea and agreeing to it and sees that there's value in trying it. Versus the child telling mom or dad, we're setting this up for you, this is the way it's going to be.
Okay.
So your success rate will be higher if the idea is a goal that the senior has. So we try to get the goals identified. What is it the senior wants?
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, how important is it for a caregiver to understand how Medicare works? Medicare, of course, is the public insurance for people 65 and older. Is it important that they understand that, or do they not have to bother with that?
Well, a lot of families think that Medicare insurance is going to pay for long-term care needs, and it does not.
Right.
That's a major, problem. People are shocked. So it pays for the hospital stay, and it pays for the rehab, which may be in a rehab hospital. But once you are reached your goals in rehab with the therapy there, it's not going to continue to pay just because you want more therapy.
Right, right.
Then when you come home, it will pay for short-term, intermittent, skilled nursing, occupational therapy, and physical therapy through a home care agency that's Medicare certified.
Right. And that's the key, Medicare certified.
Right, yeah. It has to be an agency that's certified by Medicare. I was one of those nurses for 11 years with different nonprofit Medicare certified home care agencies. So once those clients have learned what they need to learn about their diabetes, their drugs, their post-surgical recuperation, they're on their own, then they have to be discharged.
Okay.
And that's kind of the extent of the home care benefit.
And if once they've been discharged and Medicare stops paying, they can still go out and obtain assistance in the home. They have to pay for it themselves. They have to pay out of their own pocket.
They could go to outpatient rehab after they're done with in-home rehab, because when you're getting the home care agency to do in-home rehab, you have to be housebound. You can't be out driving freely every day. You're supposed to be having difficulty getting out. So once you get stronger, you can do outpatient rehab and have insurance cover a little bit more in a clinic. I like to do that with people. But yes, once you have chronic needs for some supervision, for some help in the house, for some oversight, or you need a nurse to do something, it's a private pay, various fees, but even a little bit of that private pay intermittently is affordable by most everybody if it's done right. That's what's so remarkable about using private pay people. People are assuming that it's too expensive, they can't afford it. And that's a myth.
Now, you said something interesting a little bit earlier. You said that it's important to have it be the older adult's idea that they need certain levels of assistance, and that you can't tell them exactly what to do. Let that be their own idea. That's kind of changing the communication, isn't it? Are there other things that can be done in terms of changing the communication so that the relationship between the caregiver and the older adult is better?
Communicating with seniors is a real specialty and an art, and there's lots of books on the subject and websites. But if people can remember a couple of basic things, it will help them. They should sit back and relax. And ask open-ended questions. What, where, when, how. What do you see as the things that are bothering you this week, Mom? How do you think your doctor can best serve you? How was your rehab stay that you just came out of? What's going on with the visiting nurse now that they're coming to your house? What are the side effects or what are the actions of the medicines you're taking? What are they for? I don't understand. Pretend you don't understand. And then you'll know what their understanding is and what their feelings are. And listen. listen, listen.
Okay.
And in that listening process, they will start to relax and feel heard and develop a trust. So that's number one. Relax, sit back, open-ended questions. Then we need to go forward. We need a little bit of a plan if we want them to get some services or agree to services or stay compliant with their drugs or see their doctor that they don't want to see. So that also has to kind of come from their idea. And sometimes that's really hard for the caregiver and the children who have an agenda and they got to get back on their agenda. Well, the senior's agenda is different than our agenda. And we have to go with their agenda.
Okay.
If it's safe enough to go at their pace, we need to slow it down and help them stay in control. And for some seniors that are very controlling and get angry and agitated at other people, you can even use the word control. We want you to stay in control, Dad, so that you feel like you're in charge, Dad. And it's actually nourishing to them to hear those words versus avoid those words.
Okay, well, let's follow the thread of communication for a second, and let's use a couple of scenarios. It's known that most people would prefer to be able to stay in their home as long as possible. But for some people, there comes a time when you either have to downsize or you need to go someplace where you're going to be provided with some assistance. We also know that it's important that people have enough money. And we also know it's important that people do some legal planning. So how does a caregiver open up these three different subjects? I.e., gee, Mom, Dad, you might no longer be able to live at home. Gee, Mom, Dad, do you have enough money? And gee, Mom, Dad, do you have the appropriate planning? Without appearing to be inquisitive, nosy, or getting into somebody else's business. How do you do that? How do you communicate that?
Not easy.
Okay.
I think sometimes it's easier to hire a consultant if you can't get them to agree to share their finances with you and they're 89 years old and they've never shared it with you, or you're not quite sure if they have a will, or who's the healthcare proxy, power of attorney, how much money do you have to play with to help them? Because over time they may get memory loss, and they really need you to step in. And so if you bring in a consultant, sometimes things move along a little quicker. The consultant has forms and questions and speaks directly to the senior to try to get them to put some things down. And then they might even ask the senior, is it okay if I share it with Susie, your daughter who's here with us today? And usually they're feeling like, yes, it's probably a good idea to have someone else know this stuff. And I have books and easy workbooks and easy forms.
Oh, good. Good.
And I often like them to have an estate plan and direct them to estate planning elder law attorneys. That's a real specialty, and that's really needed in order to know what I can suggest to them for living options.
Well, I've actually had clients ask me the question, we want to talk to Mom and Dad, we don't know what legal documents they have, do you have any suggestions? And my suggestion has always been very similar to what you said earlier, and that is, go to them and say, listen, we just met with our lawyer, which is true, they're sitting in front of me, right? Just met with our lawyer and we talked about our estate plan. What did you do? Can you share with us what you did so we can perhaps use that as a basis for what we ought to do? And to find that 8 out of 10 times, the parent will talk. There'll be a couple of times where they won't, but they will. Again, like you said, it's letting them be in charge. Let them talk about what they did and instruct their son and daughter in terms of what they could be doing and what might be in their interest.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Ask Mom and Dad to educate you.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mom and Dad
Can we benefit from your experience and your wisdom?
Yes,
kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you can do that with all different topics.
Sure.
But legal is one of them, financial, medical even.
Exactly, yeah. Now, you mentioned a little bit earlier somebody who's suffering from dementia, and staying with the theme of communication. Obviously, when somebody has dementia, the communication has to change. How do you change it, and what should you be doing with somebody who's suffering from dementia in terms of effectively communicating?
I recommend that people understand, if there's a diagnosis with the parent, understand what that dementia diagnosis is, because Alzheimer's is different than Lewy body and frontal temporal lobe. There's many different kinds of dementia, and even mild cognitive impairment, which is mild memory loss. Once you understand the symptoms, then you can be educated on how to speak and how to direct that person. So I have a woman who's 67, young, Alzheimer diagnosis. So that means she's probably had it for 5-7 years, but she just got diagnosed in the last year. And she can't find the drawers for the silverware in the kitchen.
Wow.
And she's walking the streets. She loves to walk, and she walks by herself. She can't figure out how to use her cell phone. She has live-in aides for her and her husband who had a stroke. So she's got supervision around the clock. They have long-term care, health insurance paying for that at the moment. And so I look at, teaching the caregivers how to communicate with her and how to use gesture. Like, we're going to do laundry over here now.
Okay.
And people with Alzheimer's need to see body movement and see you doing something, not just verbal. It's time to do the laundry now. I use GPS cell phones and GPS devices, so she doesn't want anyone to walk with her, and she's still safe enough, but she did get lost. She went 5 miles out of her way. So I usually call the police department and ask them what toys are they playing with. I compare them with online, devices, and then I have some that I like. And so using devices to help someone stay safe in the home and outside the home is really fascinating. That's a way to help them.
Now, there are some older adults that need certain devices in the home. I'm not talking about cell phones. Maybe they need a walker, or maybe they need something for the commode, wheelchair, that sort of thing. What do caregivers need to know about a loved one who needs certain devices around the house? Is there information that of which they should be aware?
It's helpful to tap into the latest physical therapy that the client has had.
Okay.
So I usually can tell if someone needs more physical therapy. I might suggest we get it through Medicare with home care again, because it's been 8 months to a year and a half. And having the physical therapist come in, they'll evaluate all of the durable medical equipment that the person would need and where it should be, where grab bars should be. And there's only a handful of things covered by Medicare. And sometimes people need their house modified. So I use home modification construction companies. We build ramps, put in elevators, interior, exterior, electric stair chairs, or they just need to have a new walker or a new commode or an electric bed.
When you modify a home, do you do things so that the lights come on automatically when somebody goes into a room and that sort of thing?
Lighting is a whole specialty with home modification. And that can be arranged, Speakers, speakerphones, cameras, so that your child in the Midwest can watch you. There are companies that have CO2 smoke detectors and cameras, as well as the necklace or the bracelet Lifeline.
Now, you were mentioning long-distance communication. I would have to think, and I've personally never had to do this, but I would have to think that long-distance communication is different than if you're in the same room with mom and dad. Yes, no? And if so, how do you make that communication more effective?
Well, I like to use online programs like Skype. There's different kinds of technology so that you can speak to mom or dad. There are computer systems and software programs you can purchase from a company where the weather will pop up on mom and dad's screen. They have a touch screen, and call Jimmy, call Maria. There are games that pop up if they're living alone and they want to have social interaction. There are sensors that are built into the software program, so their child in Colorado will know if the front door is opening and what time the door is opening. There is a company that is being developed right now. It's a startup company. They can do virtual MD visits.
Oh, wow.
So the daughter, the son, perhaps me, perhaps the doctor, the client can all talk to each other through the computer screen and we could share lab reports, x-rays, medical
Wow.
visits. And that's one way to reach people who are far away, who need to come together to review something.
Right. That's good. That's
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
And electric pillboxes. I get them shipped to me from all over the country,
Is
and
that
I
right?
love playing with them. There's a
Yeah.
new one that's on pilot study. It's
Uh-huh.
free to any of my clients because it's in pilot mode. It's got a camera built in under it.
That's great.
So if the senior wants to try to fill it themselves, the camera will tell the company if it's being done right, and they'll call me if it's not. And
Technology is amazing, isn't it?
beeps, bright light, talks to you, and they call you if you forget. That's really helping a lot of people stay home, living longer at home.
Yeah. Yeah,
Or
I can
assisted
see
living.
how that does that. Yeah. Now let's. It's from talking with family members. It's my experience that oftentimes in a family you have one caregiver. You have one that does the caregiving, and oftentimes that caregiver becomes easily frustrated, even exhausted. What can that caregiver do to become less frustrated and less exhausted in providing care for the older adult?
One of the things I see a lot of caregivers doing is hiring a companion or an aide, a personal care worker. And that can be good for the senior, but it can be exhausting for the daughter or son to oversee how that's going. That's kind of one of my specialties, is hand selecting the caregiver so it's a perfect match, and ongoingly monitoring how the client is adapting to that care. That alone takes a lot of stress off of the child when someone else can kind of oversee the household and how it's going and help write that care plan for that personal care worker. That's an inexpensive way to get a few hours a week of help and assistance and social stimulation.
And it makes sense. It also brings a third party in there, and there's no emotional attachment, and I would think the older adult's more likely to cooperate.
And what the children don't understand is that's very different, hiring an aide, than hiring a care manager.
Right.
So a nurse care manager like myself is definitely not the same as an aide, and that's a different role.
Now let's talk a little bit about advocating for the older adult. What does a caregiver need to know in order to become an effective advocate for his or her parent?
Oh, that's a great question. I spend a lot of time being a professional advocate for people. Often it's in an acute care hospital, might be in the ICU while they're intubated. I meet people in the ICU, the emergency room, then they go on to a regular floor, they might have surgery. So you can imagine, just that alone, it's incredibly stressful. For somebody like myself as a consultant, it's energizing. All of this is energizing because I'm not the child for that person. And I can step back and just be an advocate. When I had to do that for my in-laws, it was exhausting and it was worrisome, and that's so draining. And all the kids came in from all over the country to help each other. So that's one thing, is bring the kids from all over the country. If they can fly in to help relieve you in some way, ask them to. And if you have a sibling who is in Texas who has some money and the one in Colorado is free to come, ask if he can pay for the one in Colorado to come. You know, share the resources a little bit. Be generous with one another if you have siblings or close relatives. But being an advocate is kind of complicated, but basically you're using your intuition and your judgment, and I'm using my knowledge on what a client is allowed to have in these settings under insurance. So, yeah, I just finished this year with a really difficult case with a woman who had a hip fracture. She fell and broke her pelvis.
Wow.
Went on vacation, came back in a lot of pain.
Wow.
She just got worse. She thought she could make it on the airplane.
Wow.
So she did, and she came back and she was a mess. And then she fell again, broke her other pelvis, had a GI bleed, was very depressed, 88-year-old, was previously living alone.
So advocacy
that's a typical case, unfortunately.
Advocacy is important.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's a good place for us to start.
She wrote me a very long love letter.
Okay. As a nurse geriatric care manager, Linda Smith is engaged in meeting the needs of an increasingly growing number of older adults, many of whom live with age-related disabilities. Today, people aged 65 or older represent one of the world's fastest-growing populations. It's a population that requires unique medical and social services. This population, especially as its members reach the end of the life cycle, is vulnerable and needs services. When people think of services for older adults, they focus on medical care. Though there are many healthcare specializations for the elderly, nurse geriatric care management is about much more than medical care. It addresses issues such as family caregiving, housing, medical advocacy, chronic illness, and long-term care solutions. Today we learned that the objective of Metrowest Elder Care Management is to provide its clients with peace of mind by managing their transitions and linking them to quality professional resources that provide for the greatest level of safety and independence. We also learned how caregiving can be made easier, how to prevent caregiving exhaustion, and how to enhance communication with our aging parents. We also learned the importance of understanding insurance coverages, being aware of housing options, and adjusting the home to meet the needs of the older adult. As baby boomers age, a larger network of services and programs will have to be developed to support and nurture the older adult population. With increased longevity, improved medical care, and treatment options, we will all ultimately need to come to grips with the dimensions of aging. The trick is respecting the older adults' wishes to maintain their autonomy as long as possible while not burdening their families. In other words, achieving a meeting of the minds. So take charge of your future by doing your homework. For as Ben Franklin is quoted as saying, an investment in knowledge always pays the best interest. In closing, thanks to my guest Linda Smith for participating on this program. And as always, thank you to you, our viewers, for watching Your Money, Your Life. My name is Attorney Ramsey Bahrawy, Building Your Trust.